the hope is that teams will roll coverage, bring double teams for Christian Kirk because he's the known commodity. That could open up opportunity for Brian Thomas Jr. If Brian Thomas Jr. is to flash, though, that is where this offense gets back to where it was in 2022, but with more marquee names, with all due respect to Marvin Jones and Zay Jones. That is where, okay, you rolled coverage onto Kirk, and that allowed Brian Thomas Jr. to get downfield and score. Well, now you're going to bring safety help over the top for him, but wait, you have Gabe Davis open.
Yeah.
And so that is where I think this offense takes it to the next level, because even when you had Zay Jones and Marvin Jones, neither of those two players' forte is stretching the field from that Z wide receiver, X wide receiver position and just getting vertical. That is not their specialty. They're both much more nuanced route runners, can also do some dirty work over the middle. And so that is where I think, they really didn't talk about it in the episode, about the presence of Gabe Davis, a guy who, if you look at the success Stephon Diggs was able to have in his first few years in Buffalo, I don't think Gabe Davis gets enough credit for being a big reason as to why.
Yeah, and it was one of the stats. I don't know, Mia, if it was the week you were here. I think you were here when I said that Gabe Davis had the top when it comes to easy targets, which is one of the most open wide receivers. He was the second most open wide receiver when it came to end zone targets last season. The only guy ahead of him was Stephon Diggs. Those two. So whether that's what the Bills were able to scheme up, and they knew the strengths of Josh Allen, and they knew that Josh Allen could also move a little bit, so some teams had to put a spy on them, and then sometimes that opens things up in the back end. So there's multiple facets of how that offense is a little bit different. But for me, it is a big indicator that I just don't think we truly had that here last season, that guy. And now we have two, by the way, Brian Thomas Jr. and Gabe Davis.
They doubled down.
Yes.
They said, we can't stretch the field, we're going to go get two of them, which part of that, of course, was you had to go get Gabe Davis because you couldn't guarantee Brian Thomas Jr. was going to be sitting there in the waitings for you during the NFL draft.
Yeah, and that's why it's always the interesting argument, and we've had it so much this offseason that it's almost just like beating a dead horse at this time when they're like, I can't believe they feel like they replaced Calvin Ridley with Gabe Davis. That was not what was happening there. Gabe Davis obviously was something that they wanted to go get a red zone. They knew they needed somebody. They had a terrible red zone percentage the last 2 years. They knew they needed to add a wide receiver who had a strength in that, and Gabe Davis did. But that wasn't a Calvin Ridley replacement. Brian Thomas Jr. is more so a Calvin Ridley replacement than Gabe Davis was. They just got lucky enough to where they were able to get both in one offseason.
And that's why in that clip we just listened to from Bootleg Football, EJ Snyder made the point, or rather Brett made the point of Brian Thomas Jr. isn't going to be expected to be the Calvin Ridley number one alpha that we thought Calvin Ridley would be until 2025. But I do think he is going to be called upon to play that X position and to stretch the field opposite Gabe Davis. And that's an important thing. Like, I think the ceiling for Brian Thomas Jr. is a nuanced route runner beyond what he was able to do at LSU, which we still don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, from what we've heard from the coaching staff here in Jacksonville, he can run more routes than he was asked to do at LSU. They just said, all right, the kind of, the signature Joe Burrow, screw it, Jamar's down there somewhere.
Yeah.
Listen, it works in the Bayou, so they're going to just keep doing that because they got the same similar personnel as they had once upon a time in 2019. But I think eventually, yes, he will be that guy that could also come across the middle.
And I also think it gives Christian Kirk, which we've already seen Christian Kirk be successful here with Trevor, but it also gives Christian Kirk that opportunity to just be the Christian Kirk he needs to be and not have to do too much, because I do feel like in certain aspects the last 2 years we were asking Christian Kirk to do everything, and it almost hurt the offense in certain ways, because I do think where we talk about some of Trevor's struggles are some of the checkdowns or the shorter yardage areas, because we know Trevor likes to go vertical. We know he likes to go down the field, but he just didn't have that guy. So I think they tried to force some opportunities for some of the guys that, like an Evan Engram and Christian Kirk, that's just not their strengths.
I think you make the good point, Taylor, of, well, look at what the offense turned into when he wasn't on the field. And again, I don't know how much involvement outside of being present for the install and for OTAs that Christian Kirk had in the development and the crafting of this offense once upon a time in the spring of 2023. But it sure as heck seemed like he was such an important cog in the machine that when you didn't have him, and because he is a high IQ player who could play multiple positions, whether that's in the slot or outside, you couldn't plug and play anybody else. And perhaps that speaks to that onboarding point that we've made such a big deal about this offseason, both on this program as well as within the walls of the Miller Electric Center. Now, the other point I wanted to get at from this episode that we're reacting to from Bootleg Football, the Jaguars-specific episode, Evan Engram. I think we all forget the fact that Evan Engram came up 37 yards short of 1,000 yards last season, despite 114 catches, which that yards per catch number just blows my mind. That was 8.4. Travis Kelce slightly ahead of him with a 10.6 yards per catch, so not a whole heck of a lot. Only had 20-some-odd more yards more than Evan Engram last year. That was good for 29th. Evan Engram was 30th overall in the league. But I'm curious, is he a safety valve in the Jaguars' 2024 offense? Or is he a focal point? Because last year he had to become a focal point, especially in the final 7 weeks of the season. But I think that because this team was trying to operate within a 15-yard box, or at least that's how it looked like, despite the downfield numbers that for some reason look better on paper than they did the season prior.
Yeah.
I felt like because they were playing the structure of the offense within this box, you had to go to that safety valve because he's the one who's going to do the dirty work over the middle and was going to win at the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, and I think and that's why it's going to be so interesting to watch this offense, because it's something we've talked about a lot when we say that Doug Peterson loves his tight ends and he loves making sure his tight ends fit in. We also say that Evan Ingram's more of the receiving type of tight end. And so how much do we also even see a guy like a Brenton Strange, who people were kind of shouting out of why did we even draft this guy last season? Do we see him mixed in a little bit more and see them doing more, a little bit to tight end stuff every now and then? They have to. I know, because you have to start mixing up this offense, and we'll go on in my tangent brought to you by Chick-fil-A in a little while. I will go in depth about some of those factors of what the offense, where the struggles came, and let me tell you, it's many things. It wasn't just one thing. It wasn't just an injury. Many things factored in to some of the issues that was coming from the offense, but part of that is it was a very predictable offense, and they go into that in this bootleg episode. So I think that you almost, with what you've been able to see from Evan Engram, you want him to be a focal point, in my opinion, because he's just been able to be so productive. If you can get 114 receptions out of somebody, you have to, you feel like that's a large part of your offense at that point.
I am curious because a year ago this time we were discussing how Marvin Jones Jr. was the only one subtracted of substance from the 2022 offense. And the notion was, Calvin Ridley's going to take all of the production that Marvin Jones Jr. had and then also pull from Christian Kirk and pull from Zay Jones. What is that conversation, especially as it relates to today's question of the day? What is the ratio of you lose 1,000 yards from Calvin Ridley? You lose 1,000 yards, and what was that? How many catches did he have? I'm pulling it up right now. He had 1,116 yards and 76 catches. How are you distributing that? Is it simply one person? Because as we just said, the Jaguars doubled down. They bring in two other guys. But also, if you get a healthy season of Christian Kirk, how does that affect that ratio?
So here's one thing that I think factors into it a ton, and it is something where we can point to injuries. Because when you look at Evan Engram, the first half of the season, his receptions sat 4, 5, 6, 7. Every game had max 7 receptions.
2023.
This is last year. Yes. Max.
Because in 2022 it was similar, but I think a lot of that was them finding ways
trying to figure out how they're getting him in. So last year, the top in the first half of the season was 7 receptions. You hit halfway through the season when you're starting to deal with the Zay Jones injury and you're dealing with Christian Kirk a few weeks after that. He has 4 games with 10, 11, 10, 10, another 9. So you're getting that uptick in the second half because the wide receivers were so banged up. You truly had nobody to throw to at that point. So I can see, I still think he should be tight end 4 or 5. I do think he should still be up there just based on what he's been able to do here the last couple seasons in Jacksonville. But I get why people think that maybe that uptick is going to go down a tad, like the amount that he's getting the ball, just because they didn't even mention Gabe Davis, and you said that. They didn't mention it in this conversation either.
He was a top 50 wide receiver last year.
He's going to get targets. He's going to get those red zone targets. He's going to get them important because he's one of those guys, too, when it's like a 3rd and 9 that you need to get the ball to. He's going to be somebody that Trevor's going to be looking for. In addition, we're hoping that the run game is fixed. Last year, they did not run the ball. And this year, you are counting on that balance of the run pass to be a little more evened out. And so because of that, that also, to me, is some of those receptions and some of those targets getting taken away from Evan Engram. I would still guarantee high 80s, low 90s, in my opinion, of his receptions. I don't see 100 plus again, but I do think he's still going to be such an important part of this offense, and he's proven now that he can be that person too.
Is he going to lead the Jaguars in receiving yards, though? Because technically, if you subtract Calvin Ridley, because Calvin Ridley led the Jaguars in receiving yards last year, but if we're taking him out, your leading receiver is Evan Engram coming into this season. And again, part of that is Christian Kirk missed the last 6 games. And that's why I think I would still say Kirk. And if Kirk's healthy, I think he'll still be that guy. And like I think Evan will be right around what he was last year, yardage-wise, but less receptions. Because that was an interesting number. George Kittle had an insane number when it came to 40 less receptions or something like that, but in a lot more yardage. I could see Evan Ingram's reception number going down a tad, but yardage staying about the same. Right around that 1,000-yard mark, but like I said, high 80s, low 90s when it comes to that reception share for him.